Hello everyone, welcome to the fourth session of Flutter Forward Extended. Uh, we will start the session within 5 minutes, so keep waiting.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session of Flutter Forward Extended. In this session, we will be discussing API integration with HTTP in your Flutter application. I am Satyajit Pradhan. Along with me, I have Amisha Samal. We are community members at GDSC VSSUT. So, what's an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is a software intermediary that allows two applications to talk to each other and exchange information and functionality. So here is a basic diagram that explains the working of an API. We have two applications. You may consider application 1 as the front end and application 2 as the back end. The API sort of acts as a bridge between the two applications and establishes communication between them. When a client application calls an API, it submits a request to the API and the API retrieves the requested data. After retrieving the data, the API delivers it back to the client application. This is how an API basically works. Packages and plugins. Flutter supports using shared libraries or modules of code that has been contributed by either by the Flutter engineers or other developers of the Flutter and Dart ecosystem. This allows you to quickly build an application without having to develop every single thing from scratch. These modules are called packages. Some of these might contain Flutter specific functionalities and thus have a dependency on the Flutter framework, restricting their use to Flutter only. Fluoro package is example of such a package. Plugins. Plugin is a special type of package that contains an API written in Dart that has been combined with one or more platform-specific implementations. It makes platform-specific functionality available to the app. These may contain native code, for example, Kotlin code for Android, JavaScript code for web, and Swift code for iOS. Where to find these packages? Packages that are compatible with Flutter are published to pub.dev. Let me just quickly head over to pub.dev. Here you can see that in this pub.dev website, you can find the packages that are compatible with Flutter. Here are some of packages that are in the Flutter favorites. Flutter favorite packages are the packages that you should give preference to because of wide acceptance and community support. So when you need a package in your application, you can just head over to the page of that package on pub.dev. Here I am going to the URL launcher package. After that, go to the installing tab. Then run this command on the on terminal of the project directory of your Flutter application. In this way, you can add the packages to your Flutter application. Alternatively, you can also add the package as a dependency on the pubsec.yml file of your Flutter project and then run flutter pub get command. Native APIs. Native APIs are the APIs that provide platform-specific functionalities to the app. Location, camera, microphone access are some of the examples of these functionalities. Generally, to access a native API, you need to write platform-specific code. But the Flutter ecosystem has hundreds and thousands of plugins that basically covers almost every use cases. You can also choose to write your own plugins, but that is out of the scope of this session. URL launcher plugin. This is one example of a Flutter plugin. This is a Flutter plugin for launching a URL. The provided URL is passed directly to the host platform for handling. It supports multiple URL schemes, such as the HTTPS URL scheme. When this is provided to the plugin, it will open the URL in your default browser. Then comes the file path. It opens the file or folder using the default app. It also is supported on the desktop platform. Then telephone number. It makes a phone call to the provided phone number using the phone's default dialer application. An SMS phone number. This sends an SMS to the provided phone number using the default messaging app. So here is a basic application that we have written using the URL launcher plugin. It is a really simple app. It has a button at the center of it. When you click that button, it opens up the homepage of Flutter, the flutter.dev web page. You can see the screenshot on the right side. Now, let's have a peek at the code of this application. At line 4, you can see that we have stored the URL of the Flutter homepage in the URL1 variable. In the second phase, you can see at line 37, we have used the method URL launch URL from the URL launcher plugin. It accepts the URL1 variable, the variable in which we have stored the URL of the Flutter homepage. Just to implement this simple URL launching functionality, you would have to write hundreds of lines of platform-specific code for each platform. Instead of that, you can just simply use the Flutter plugin to quickly implement the functionality that directly works on all the platforms. HTTP API calling. HTTP API calling is the API that uses HTTP protocol for communication between two applications. This method allows you to establish communication between two applications that reside on two different computers. These APIs are generally used in client-server architecture when some resources are available in the server and these resources are provided to the client through the API whenever requested. Now we will talk about HTTP package. It is a Flutter package that allows you to perform network requests over the internet on your application. This package contains a set of high-level functions and classes that makes it easy to consume HTTP resources. It has support for all the major platforms. Now we will be talking about the file formats in API calling. There are numerous file formats that can be used for data interchange over APIs. However, in current times, JSON and XML, these two are the most popular ones. JSON, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. In JSON file format, data is stored in key value pairs. The key and value are separated by a colon in the middle, with the key on the left side and the value on the right side. Different key values are separated by a comma. The key is a string surrounded by double quotation mark. Here you can see the example screenshot. We have a JSON file that contains the weather information. The key temperature has value 35. The wind speed key has the value 5, and the humidity key has value 50%. XML or extensible markup language. This file format follows the basic writing style of a markup language. An XML document or an XML data is a collection of elements and attributes which can be nested inside one another. The elements are surrounded by opening and closing tags. Here we have the same example. The the temperature value is 35. It is stored in between opening and closing tag of temperature. Similarly, the other values are also displayed. Now I will request Amisa to take over this session.
So, JSON to object converter. The data that we receive from the web server is always a string. We pass the data to convert it into a JavaScript object so that it can be used in a program. So now we have this JSON structure. If it begins with curly braces, it is a map. And if it begins with a square bracket, then it is a list of maps. So here clearly we have a map. Then we make a plain old Dart object file for this structure. After that, we need to work for mapping this class members to JSON object. For that, we need to create a factory method. The factory keyword is used while implementing a constructor that doesn't always create a new instance of its class. The objective is to deserialize your JSON. That means it takes the raw data and reconstructs the object model. Then we need to access the object. For loading the response, you need to load the raw JSON string from the assets. Then we have to decode the raw JSON string that we got. After that, we need to deserialize the decoded JSON response. At last, we print the values to check in our console. So parsing the JSON file is basically retrieving the JSON data and getting the array, and then iterating the JSON array and mapping it to the Java objects. So moving on to how to make API calls. First, you need to get the API URI and endpoints. You have to know the uniform resource identifier of the API that you are using. Without this, you won't know where to send your request. You need to find that in the docs and use it in your app. The endpoint changes depending on the API. As of endpoints, you can either add that to the end of the base path or just list the endpoint in your request. Then you need to add a relevant package to your app. The pub.dev have many packages available as you have seen before. Here we are using the HTTP package as it is the most basic and easy to use. Add the package to your pubsec.yml file. You have to formulate the request. First thing you need to include is a request verb. There are four types of verbs available here. First, the get verb helps to retrieve a resource. The post verb helps to create a new resource. The put verb helps to edit or update an existing resource. And the delete verb helps to delete a resource. Then, moving on to including a header. A header tells the API about your request and response that you are expecting. It ensures the API understands what you are asking and responds in a way that is expected and easy for you to understand. We have three kinds of headers. First is the user agent header. This characteristic lets servers and network peers identify the application, operating system, vendor, and version of the requesting user agent. Then the content type header explains the type of information in the body of request. Without this, the API might receive a request and not understand what it is or how to decode it, and you won't get a response. The accept header explains the format you would like to receive your response back from the API. Without this, the API could return the data in XML when you wanted it in JSON. Then, including an API key or access token. API keys and access tokens are unique identifiers used to authenticate calls to an API. These are made up of strings of letters and numbers that identify the client application making the request. These are used to grant or deny requests based on client's access permission and track the number of requests made for usage purpose. Then we create a file that handles the API calls, and in that we write all the specific methods to fetch and pass data. At last, we can use the data in our app. HTTP status codes. When you send request to an API, as we wait for the response, we expect status code that let us know either the request was processed successfully or not. The HTTP status code gives us this information. The 2xs code. The 2xs code conveys the server has received the client's request and processed it successfully. We have some examples here. 200 OK request states that the request was successful. 201 created states that the resource has been created on the server. 202 accepted states the request has been received but still is being processed. And 204 no content gives us the gives that the request has been successfully processed but no content will be returned. Then we have 4xs code. This code conveys that the client's request has an error. The 400 bad request states that there is something wrong with client's request and the server cannot process it. 401 authorized states that the client is unauthorized or unauthenticated and the client must authenticate itself to get the requested response. The 403 forbidden tells that client doesn't have access rights to the content, that is, it is unauthorized to the so the server is refusing to give the requested resource. The 404 not found states that the URL is not recognized. In this, it can also mean that the endpoint is valid, but the resource itself doesn't exist. Then we have the 5xs code. This code this code indicates the server errors. The 500 internal server states that the server has encountered a situation it doesn't know how to handle it. It may be incorrect or missing HTTP status code mapping. 502 bad getaway states that the error response means that the server server while working as a getaway to get a response needed to handle the request and got an invalid response. The 503 service unavailable states that the server is not ready to handle the request or the server is down for maintenance or that it is overloaded. 504 endpoint request timeout. This states if there is an integration request takes longer than integration timeout parameter, the API gateway gives this response. Then moving on to now we have an that app that integrates the movies API where you can show the information about different movies. So this is the API. This is the app where you can see there are different movies and you can click a movie and you will get the information about it. You can also share it or have see the information. So let's have a look about its working in code. So first, we need to add these dependencies to our pubsec YML file and get those dependencies. Then we move to our fetching of data part. After adding the package, we need to make a network request. import the HTTP package as HTTP. Then here we use future, which is a code that class for working with async operations. A future object represents a potential value or error that will be available to some time in the future. The item model class contains the data received from the HTTP call. Then the URI parse is used to create a new URI object from API URI format. Then the get method is used to declare a response variable. If the status code is 200, then it states that the request was successful. Then we can convert the body using that converter package and return our item model, or else an exception is thrown. Then we need to create an item model class that contains the data from the network request. This includes the factory constructor that creates an item model from JSON, eventually deserialize it. At last, we have to fetch all the data and display it as you have seen in the app. So with this, the journey of Flutter learning comes to an end for this year. We hope that you guys had an amazing learning experience with us. And if you have any suggestion ideas, you can share them with us on our social media handles. Thank you.